I want to tell you something that most people never say out loud. Building something from nothing is one of the loneliest, hardest, most consuming things a human being can do. Not because of the work, as exhausting as it is the easy part. The hard part is the trust, because you cannot build something real alone. At some point, you have to trust someone, you have to look at a person, hand them a piece of everything you are building, and believe that they will protect it the same way you would. Now, I want you to imagine doing that for 7 years, building something side by side with someone you considered, not just a partner, but a friend. Someone who sat with you in the early days when there was no money, who stayed late, when the clients were difficult, who celebrated every milestone like it was their own, because you built it together. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, in a coffee shop you had both been to 100 times, they slide a piece of paper across the table and offer you £8,000 for your half of a business worth £340,000, and smile while doing it. That is where today's story begins, and what happens next over 90 days is the most methodical, most complete, most devastating business revenge I have ever read on Reddit. Welcome back to Quietly Destroyed. I need you to stay with me for this one. Every single part of it matters, because this story is not just about revenge, it is about what happens when someone underestimates exactly the wrong person. Her name on Reddit is 90 Days Takeover. I'll call her Helena. Helena had started her business 7 years before this story begins, a specialist events and brand experience company based in Manchester that worked with corporate clients across the United Kingdom. She had started it from her kitchen table. No funding, no investors, no safety net. Just an idea, a laptop, and an absolute refusal to fail. In year 2, she had brought in a partner, a man named Greg. They had known each other professionally for 3 years. He had a background in sales and client relationships. Helena had the creative vision and operational expertise. Together, they were genuinely exceptional. The business grew. Year 3, first 6-figure revenue. Year 5, they moved into a proper office. Year 6, their biggest contract yet, a 3-year retained deal with a major corporate client worth over £100,000 annually. By year 7, the business was valued at £340,000 by an independent business valuator who both Helena and Greg had agreed to commission for insurance purposes just 8 months before this story begins. Helena and Greg were equal partners, 50% each. Every decision made together, every success shared equally, every difficult period navigated side by side. 7 years, Helena considered Greg one of her closest friends. She had been to his wedding. He had been at the hospital when Helena's mother had her operation. 7 years of real, genuine, unquestioned trust. And then Greg's wife was offered a job in Dubai, a significant job, the kind that changes the direction of a family's life. Greg told Helena over coffee that he needed to exit the business. He said he was incredibly grateful for everything, that he hoped they could make the transition as smooth as possible. Helena said, absolutely, of course, whatever he needed. They would get the business, properly valued, not that they needed to. They already had the valuation, and work out a fair exit package. Greg nodded, said, "Actually, I was thinking we could keep it simple," and slid the paper across the table. £8,000. For 50% of a business independently valued at £340,000. Helena looked at the paper, looked at Greg, and said, very calmly, "Let me think about it." Greg smiled, said, "Of course, no rush, we're friends." Helena folded the paper, put it in her bag, finished her coffee, and drove home. And that evening, she made a list. Helena was not a lawyer. She was not a financial expert, but she was someone who had built a £340,000 business from a kitchen table, which meant she understood numbers extremely well, and she understood people even better. She spent that evening going through the partnership agreement she and Greg had signed 7 years ago, the original document, which, like many documents signed between friends who trust each other completely, had been prepared by a general solicitor and signed without either of them reading every clause with the attention it deserved. Helena read it now, every clause, every word, for the first time, really reading it, and what she found changed everything. The agreement contained a clause, standard in many partnership agreements, called a right of first refusal, which stated that if either partner wished to exit, the remaining partner had the right to purchase their share at fair market value before any external sale could be made. Fair market value, not £8,000, fair market value, which, as established by the independent valuation they had both commissioned 8 months ago, was £170,000, Helena's half. She also found something else, a clause that Greg, who had clearly not reread the agreement recently, had seemingly forgotten about, a clause stating that in the event of a partner exit, the exiting partner was required to give a minimum of 90 days' notice, during which time they remained a working partner with full responsibilities before the exit could be formalized. Helena closed the document, opened her laptop, and booked an appointment with a specialist business solicitor for the following morning. She also, before she went to bed, made one additional note on her list, a note that said, 90 days, use every single one. The solicitor confirmed everything. In fact, the solicitor told Helena 2 additional things she hadn't known. Thing 1, Greg's offer of £8,000 was not just low, it was so far below fair market value that it potentially constituted a breach of the partnership agreement in itself, which gave Helena additional legal standing. Thing 2, because the business held the major corporate contract under a company registration, and Greg was still a registered director, he could not leave without the contract's client being notified, and without the client's consent to the change in directorship, which meant the client had to be kept happy for the next 90 days by both partners. Helena thanked her solicitor, paid the consultation fee, and went back to work. That afternoon, she called Greg and said, in the warmest, most professional tone, "Greg, I've had to think about your offer. I want to make sure we do this properly, as friends. So I've spoken to a solicitor who is drawing up the correct exit paperwork. It will take about 90 days to process everything cleanly. Is that okay?" Greg said, "Of course, absolutely, no problem at all." They were friends. What Greg did not know was that Helena had spent the previous evening writing a very detailed 90-day plan, and that every single day of those 90 days was accounted for. Day 1 through 30, Helena contacted every key client in the business personally, not to discuss Greg's departure, just to strengthen the relationship and build trust. Lunches, check-in calls, personal visits were all part of her plan, making sure that every client associated the business with Helena, with her face, her name, her relationship. Day 31 through 60, Helena began a quiet restructure of the business operations. Every process, every system, every supplier relationship was documented under her name, every internal procedure written up formally for the first time, in a way that made the business operationally completely Helena's. Day 61 through 90, Helena secured something she had been building toward quietly for 3 years, but had never finalized because Greg had always been cautious about growth. A second major corporate contract, a new client, who had been in conversation with Helena for 6 months, who, during a lunch in week 8, signed a 2-year retained deal worth £85,000 annually. On day 89, Helena called Greg and said, "I think we're ready to complete the exit paperwork. Can we meet tomorrow?" They met at the same coffee shop 90 days after Greg had slid that first piece of paper across the table. Helena arrived first, ordered 2 coffees, placed a folder on the table, and waited. Greg arrived in good spirits. Dubai was confirmed. The family was excited. Everything was falling into place. He sat down, looked at the folder, and said, "So, are we good to sign?" Helena said, "Almost. There are just a few things I want to make sure you're aware of before we do." She opened the folder and walked Greg through 3 things. Thing 1, the right of first refusal clause and the fair market valuation, £170,000, which was what the partnership agreement entitled her to pay for his share. Not 8,000, 170,000, which, as she explained, very professionally, she was prepared to pay in full through a structured payment agreement that her solicitor had already drafted. Greg's expression changed at this point, but Helena continued. Thing 2, the client relationships. She placed a 1-page summary on the table. Every key client with a note next to each one. Of the last time they had met with Helena, the last time they had met with Greg, and a brief note from the feedback Helena had quietly gathered during the previous 90 days about which partner each client considered their primary contact. Every single client had named Helena. Thing 3, she placed a single page on the table. The new contract, the one signed 8 days ago. £85,000 annually. For 2 years, which had been signed by the client, with Helena listed as the sole relationship manager. Greg looked at the 3 pages on the table for a very long time, and then looked at Helena, who said, "I want to be fair, Greg. I always have. The agreement entitles you to £170,000 for your share. My solicitor's draft proposes payments over 24 months, so it doesn't affect cash flow. I think that's fair. I think that's what 7 years deserves. Don't you?" Greg said nothing for a long time, and then said, "What happened to 8,000? Helena said, I read the agreement. Greg looked at the table. And then, for the first time in the entire conversation, he smiled a real smile and said, I should have known better than to try and shortchange you. Helena said, yes, you should have. Greg signed the exit agreement, the one Helena's solicitor had prepared. Payment terms, 24 months. £170,000. Full fair market value. Every penny. He left the partnership 30 days later, formally, cleanly, professionally. The clients were informed, every single one of them responded with complete confidence in Helena and the business going forward. The new client, whose contract had been signed, didn't even know there had been a partner. Helena wrote in her Reddit post that the first morning she sat in the office alone was the strangest feeling she had ever experienced. She said, it wasn't triumphant, it wasn't angry, it was just quiet, the good kind of quiet, the kind that comes after something is finally finished. She then did something I think is extraordinary. She sent Greg a message, personally, wishing him and his family well in Dubai, meaning it. He replied, with one line, you built something remarkable, Helena. I'm sorry I forgot that for a moment. She wrote at the end of her Reddit post, people keep asking me if I'm angry, and the honest answer is, I was, for about 48 hours, and then I was too busy spending 90 days building something so completely mine, that by the time the paperwork was signed, the anger had been replaced by something better, clarity. I knew exactly what I had built, exactly what it was worth, exactly who it belonged to. The 90 days weren't just a notice period, they were the best 90 days I ever invested in my own business. Greg didn't just try to shortchange me, he accidentally gave me the most focused, most productive, most transformative 90 days of my career. So, in a strange way, thank you, Greg. Greg thought, when he slid that piece of paper across the table, that Helena would be grateful, that she would accept less than she deserved, because she valued the friendship, because she trusted him, because, after 7 years, she would not want the conflict. He was right about one thing. She valued the friendship. She valued it enough to handle this, with complete professionalism, and let go. There's no rush, just a sense of calm, a sense of clarity, and a new beginning. With complete fairness and complete respect for what 7 years actually meant. The number on that paper was not respect, and Helena knew the difference. I want to say something to every person listening who has ever built something, any business, any project, any creative work. Know what it is worth, not what someone tells you, not what feels polite to accept, but what it is actually worth. Read your agreements, understand your rights, know the numbers, because the moment you know exactly what you have built and exactly what it is worth, nobody can take it from you without your permission. Helena did not get angry. She did not make threats. She simply read the document, consulted a professional, and spent 90 days making the business so completely hers that there was never any question of what it was worth or who it belonged to. That is the end of episode 11, here on Quietly Destroyed. If you have ever been in business with someone, or if you are right now, leave a comment below, because the one piece of advice this story gives, more clearly than anything else, is to read your agreement today, not tomorrow, today. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because next week, we have a story about a woman whose neighbor tried to build a fence through her garden and discovered, rather too late, that she had been sitting on a land registry document for 11 years. That changed everything, and I will see you then. Know your worth. Read the documents, and remember, the best revenge is always served cold, and that is all with love.